they should know, and that's another part of what we have in our engine is how to be able to pre-educate somebody before they come in for the consult. I know there's other tools that do that, but really we take those same videos and we say, listen, before you come in for your consultation, you may be a candidate for LASIK, maybe a candidate for ICL or RLE. Most of those times it's LASIK or RLE. But my point is that they should be receiving that video content and a welcome video from the surgeon before they come into the practice. So you're not surprising them like, oh, I thought it was $4,000 or $5,000 for LASIK. Now it's $15,000 or whatever you charge for lens replacements. Pre-education is important.
Welcome to season 3 of the Ophthalmology Experience, powered by Boots Patients. Our first guest is Michael King. Michael is a passionate visionary and digital marketing strategist. He's a former vice president of marketing for a large multinational medical practice, founder of LASIK Marketing Agency, and he's also the co-founder of RLE Vision. He's worked with clients ranging from $1 million to over $100 million in revenue worldwide. Michael, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
It's my absolute pleasure. Looking forward to it, man.
Yeah. And so you are the first guest of season 3. So congrats. And I think what a better way to get season 3 kicked off with something that I think is critical for most practices to think about if you're in the refractive space and you're doing either LASIK, ICL, RLE, or a combination of all of it, including premium cataract surgery. But with the refractive market trends that we've seen the past few years, I think practices really need to think about an RLE strategy, and you're one of the experts. So I'm really happy to have you here so we can pick your brain.
I am an open book, my friend. Looking forward to sharing some good nuggets for anybody that's watching.
Yes. So can I know that you help practices with their strategy, and there's certain things that you do to help get them in the right position to help attract more RLE patients and get more education out there to these patients so that you can do more. What are some of the ways that when you work with a practice that you do that? Like, what are some of the top 3 things that you might suggest just to get kicked off?
Yeah, the first thing I always like to recommend is you optimize what you currently have. And what I mean by that is if you're thinking about growing your refractive lens exchange volume, the first thing you shouldn't do is start running ads. The first thing you should do would be to go to look at your existing website and see, is it set up for an RLE or CLR specific patient journey? Meaning, do you have a specific self-test that's geared towards refractive lens exchange? Do you have the ability for people potentially to do a Zoom or a virtual consultation to learn about the procedure so you can be able to kind of funnel people that way? In addition to that, it's how are you communicating to people about refractive lens exchange? You don't want to put them in the LASIK track that you've got. So what types of email content, what types of video content, how are you nurturing these types of people? Because refractive lens exchange, well, in December, it had its highest search volume in the last 20 something years was in December, right? So right now there's a lot of search volume about it. The challenge is most people still don't really know what it is comparative to LASIK, right? So
Right.
you need to be utilizing video content to help getting people from being problem aware to being solution aware, right? And so I think that it requires a bit of a different mindset. So you want to set up that system, set up that patient journey first, and then the next thing you can do is start running ads. And on the ad side, people like, well, should I just start out with Google? Well, you can. The problem is that there's not as much search volume there as there is for LASIK, right? So we've seen really, really effective being able to do social advertising as well, which we can dig into more
Sure.
detail. So that's
Yeah.
what I'd say. Optimize what you currently have and then get
Mm.
yourself ready to start running ads.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And there's a couple of things I want to dive into a little deeper. So
Yeah.
you said RLE and you also said CLR. So what should we call it?
This is the age old debate. I've kind of come to the realization that as a surgeon or as a medical practice, you're going to call it whatever it is that you want to call it. Right. And so the thing is that if you're going to choose one, stick to that. I've seen practices that are very successful in their market calling it CLR. I've also seen practices very successful at refractive lens exchange. Right. Um, at my brother's practice, KT Vision, we call it refractive lens exchange. The only thing that I think I was a little bit reluctant as a marketer about why not to call it CLR, and I get it that it
Mhm.
actually makes more sense, custom lens replacement versus refractive lens exchange.
Right.
The only thing I don't like about CLR is if you go put CLR into Google, you're having to deal with calcium lime rust removal. So that's the only downside of it.
Mhm.
But the truth is that whatever it is that you choose to call it, stick with that and roll with it, because it's just we're going to go with RLE at majority of our practices, but you can do both, and I think you're fine with that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And, I think another thing practices should consider too is what is the majority of the people in the market calling it? Because when they come to your practice, they may start asking, hey, I got some information about RLE or whatever. And I think if you look at the historical just trends in the market, people are having inside the market call it RLE because we've had some even a few patients come ask us, hey, we want to know what your RLE pricing is. So it creates less confusion in the market. So maybe we can come up with a petition amongst all the ophthalmology practices and say, hey, look, let's just call it RLE. We know that it's not the most descriptive. I actually description. I think you're right, custom lens replacement is actually better, but the acronym is horrible. So I,
Yeah, it's just
that was my take on it. I think we need to go with what's there and just keep going with that momentum.
but I'll say this is that is an important, question. But the other side of it is realizing that most people have no idea what RLE is. Most people have no idea what CLR is. What you really want to focus on in your marketing is identifying and speaking to the problem that those people are having, which is frustrating wearing glasses at nighttime, which is being able to not see in a low lit restaurant, their golf game not being as good, not being able to hug their niece or nephew or grandchild without having to pick up their reading glasses. Like, speak to the pain point. I think that that's more important than the acronym of what we call it, because
Mhm.
that's where the vast majority of people are, is that they know that they have a problem. I have done many webinars on refractive lens exchange or CLR, and I can tell you the amount of questions that we get on them, it dwarfs what we get for LASIK, right? So I've had as many as 750 people register for a webinar for refractive lens exchange. And the amount of questions you cannot even keep up. If you do it properly, it's amazing, right? So I would say
Yeah.
people are hungry for information. People are hungry for a solution. And once you earn their trust and get them into your practice for a examination, then you can take it from there.
What are some of those top questions that you get for the on those webinars? Like, are they saying,
Well,
"Hey,
yeah,
I can't see on my phone. Can this help me?" Or is it more like a behavioral type question like that, or is it like, "What is this procedure?"
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's everything from what happens to my eyes as they age, is what is refractive lens exchange? Does it hurt? Is it safe? What's my recovery time going to be like? I think if you were to look at, well, maybe a few other ones would be, what is my expectation on vision? How am I going to be able to see in a distance and up close? A lot of them are the similar ones that you asked for LASIK, with the exception of, people don't understand, hey, I've had LASIK before. Can I still have RLE? And I've had, if I have RLE or CLR now, will I need cataract surgery in the future? So
Mhm.
there's a lot of those types of questions that we get, but it's amazing. I cannot even count how many times I've been at the webinar. I'm like, I can't ask the surgeon all these questions because there's so many. So that's the thing, is just be aware about this procedure. People have a lot of questions about it, and the way you market it is different than the way you market LASIK.
How important would you say is education? Because you mentioned that there's a lot of people that just don't know, they don't know the term, and you're right, LASIK has been the dominant search term, and it's been the dominant thing that for the past 20, 30, however long we've been doing LASIK is for. So
Yeah.
when you look at a marketing strategy, how do you approach education? Like, do you kind of said it a little bit, but I want you to go a little deeper. Like when you're working with people and you're setting up an education campaign, what do you tell them to do?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the biggest missed opportunities I believe that practices don't utilize when it comes to refractive lens exchange or CLR marketing is video. And having seen the benefits of doing webinars and how that helps patients to convert, I'm convinced now that utilizing video to help people in their RLE journey, if you will, is pretty much mandatory. And what I mean by that is that, so I've developed a new product called the Patient Conversion Engine, which we're launching this year. And I would be interviewing a surgeon over 60 to 90 minutes and asking some of those most common questions that people have about the procedure. So I want you to think about this. If you have somebody that's going from being problem aware, meaning they know the issue that they have with their vision, how do you get them to know about this procedure, right? So
Mhm.
many times it's like you can be hammering the phones and calling them, et cetera, but you need to utilize video content. So I focus on the first week of somebody coming in and expressing interest in the procedure or in the solution, and use video content to drip that out to people over the next week. So if you focus on that part right there, which is your lead to consultation conversion rate, I'll give a shout out to Boost because I know that they're phenomenal with their lead response time and their joyful persistence. So what we've also been able to do is latch this product on for clients that use Boost to be able to use that video content to nurture. So to me, it's really got to focus on that first week of time is being able to help convert. The second thing I would say, and many practices have not done this, Guido, which is virtual consultations. A Zoom consultation, when we started this maybe 5 years ago with doing virtual consults, we were converting roughly 40% of them to an in office consult. I'm seeing right now of attended virtual consults anywhere between 65 to 75% scheduling an in office consult. So it enables you at scale to meet with somebody, educate them about the procedure, make sure they know what it costs before they come into your practice. And it also helps reduce no shows and increase the in office conversion rate. So those are two things: video content and then virtual consults to help people on that journey.
Yeah, and that makes sense, right? Because if we're trying to educate the market and the consumer on their options, that's going to take time because it's not like they've heard this message for forever. It's something, I mean, they may have heard it in different ways, but the way that we're positioning it now is a little differently. So they may be coming in because here's what I hear commonly. Well, I came in expecting to pay $4,000 for my corrective procedure. And then you say, well, you'd actually be a better candidate for refractive lens exchange, and here's what that means, and here's the cost. And then they see that, and they're like, they had it in their head that that was the price point that they were going to have this corrective procedure at. So it is about educating. So I want you to speak on that on cost, but I also want to ask you too on the videos. So how long in those videos when you send those drip series, are they 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 1 minute? What would you say?
Great question. Yeah, and that's a very good question. So we have a script that we have. I actually just did one of these this morning with a surgeon of California where I interviewed the doctor. I would recommend when you're giving anything on the FAQ side, 90 to 120 seconds is the sweet spot. Anything more than that, and it feels like you're like, okay, this is a little bit boring, whatever. So we add custom thumbnails, we add captions on them to increase engagement. But I think that 1.5 to 2 minutes is probably the threshold. Can you have some that go over? Yes, you can. But that's kind of what I would recommend.
Yeah,
And
that
one
makes
quick
sense.
point on to what you mentioned about after people schedule a consult, if the first time that somebody is, let's say they're 50, 55 years old, the first time that they hear about RLE is after they're told they're not a candidate for LASIK, you
Mhm.
haven't pre-educated the patient properly enough. They should know, and that's another part of what we have in our engine is how to be able to pre-educate somebody before they come in for the consult. I know there's other tools that do that, but really we take those same videos and we say, listen, before you come in for your consultation, you may be a candidate for LASIK, maybe a candidate for ICL or RLE. Most of the time it's LASIK or RLE, but
Mhm.
my point is that they should be receiving that video content and a welcome video from the surgeon before they come into the practice. So you're not surprising them like, oh, I thought it was $4,000 or $5,000 for LASIK. Now it's $15,000 or whatever you charge for lens replacement. So pre-education is important.
And what's your strategy in terms of what you focus on more of in that drip series? Because let's say you had a 48-year-old, a 50-year-old who's considering moderate vision correction, but they could go either way. Do you do it based on age in your drip series?
Yeah.
You start to focus more on the RLE content?
Yeah, I think what we have found, and every practice is different. I know that there's some clinics that say, hey, we want to do RLE on anybody that's 45 and above or 40 and above. We have found the sweet spot in the market to be, on average, for a high volume RLE clinic, 60.7 years old is the average sweet spot. But what we find is that 55 to 65 is kind of that good range.
Mhm.
if you're trying to educate people that are 45 about RLE, I'm not saying they don't do it, but the challenge is that the lens isn't quite dysfunctional enough. So it becomes that trade off where they're like, we find that we get happier patients if we try to market to the 55 and older crowd. And it comes down to really properly educating people when they come into the practice. And sometimes not doing anything is the right choice. And so I think we like to educate people 55 and above all about premium lens replacement. And then that you're right, that 40 to 55 range, you kind of need to let them know about both
Mhm.
procedures.
Right. And how early in that process do you talk cost? Because as I mentioned
Hmm.
earlier in the example, a lot of people are, just conditioned that their correction is going to be somewhere between $4,000 to $5,000, and that's what the price is. And then when they come in, they can then have that sticker shock. So, how soon in that education series do you start talking about the cost?
Okay. So at KT Vision, we do not allow a patient to schedule an in-office consultation unless they've had a Zoom consult. So every single person that comes into the practice knows what the cost of refractive lens exchange is. They all know that. Now we don't lead in 2 seconds into the conversation about what it costs. You
Mhm.
want to build up value. And I think that's where, a shout out to my boy Troy Cole, where he does a really, really good job on how to be able to help people to frame pricing. But you also want to lead in with the financing amount, right? If you just spew out the actual cost per eye, I would recommend to start out with the financing cost, and you don't mention it so quickly on that Zoom call. Or even more importantly, if you are moving people directly in for that in office consult, if you haven't pre-educated that person, and then the first thing that they hear is you're not a candidate for LASIK, well, here's RLE, it's $15,000. That's where the sticker shock comes in. So you got to pre-educate people, and we do that with a virtual consult. If you don't do a virtual consult, you got to use video content. That'll help you out a lot, but it's so important to lead in with the financing amount for some people, I think.
So, how would you answer the question? Well,
Yeah.
or maybe it's the fear that some of us probably have about talking price before they come in. That we're afraid that we may scare them away before they've had an opportunity to talk to the doctor and get really excited about it. Is there maybe I'm asking you to calm my fears about that, because usually I want them to come in and get excited and talk to the doctors. That's why historically we give them a range. But so when you say price on the virtual console, you're saying, this procedure, if you're a candidate for LASIK, it could be this range. If you're a candidate for refractive lens change, it could be this range. So how do you approach that without scaring people away? That's my fear.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is if you really want to do like I have a mission to help 100 practices to do 100 eyes a month in refractive lens exchange within the next 5 years. That's my vision. That's my goal, right? So how do
Mhm.
we do that? Well, the reality is that it's okay for somebody to realize that it's not within their budget right now and that maybe they need to wait up for whenever the time is appropriate. Especially if you're running social ads, it's really hard to kind of bring somebody in from a social ad directly for an in-office consult and expect them to part with $15,000. So we use those virtual consults to pre-qualify people. But to answer your question, I think you need to build up enough value. You need to be asking the right rapport building questions, asking the right things to get the person to verbalize their pain, because those are the same people that are willing to spend $15,000 on a vacation. They're the same people who are probably willing to spend $15,000 on whatever else it may be in their life. The question is, have you built up enough value in the procedure that when you insert and you bring in the cost, right? So I would be asking somebody like, hey, for refractive lens exchange or CLR, do you have an expectation on pricing? I want to know where their mind is at first before we talk the price. And if they're like, well, I think it's $5,000, $6,000, then you'd need to kind of correct them. And then I would lead in with the financing amount, and I think that if somebody is a little bit afraid of talking pricing, I think it's also a mindset issue, and I think it's an opportunity to kind of talk to some people who've had the procedure that are related, that you have testimonials. So to kind of augment that, maybe you want to show a testimonial or two before you go into pricing. So there's a lot of different things you can do, but again, that's something I think a little bit of training helps your staff. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, you answered my question, how I would answer the question too. I think it's easier said than done, though. And you mentioned Troy, and I think that's a great point, because you have
Uh,
to have whoever's talking to that patient ahead of time has to be able to create a ton of value in that virtual consultation or during those touch points so that they see the value. Because I'm the kind of person, you ever been to a, you go to a dealership, you see the pricing before you get there, but when you get there and you get in the car and you feel the seats and you just the smell,
Bingo.
and it's like, heck yeah, like this is something that I want. And then I'm like, oh, okay, it's a little pricey, but it's something that I really want. So there, the value has to be there before you start talking pricing.
Yeah. What did Troy say once? He's like, you don't want your team to be selling out of their own wallet.
Yeah.
Right? This
Yeah.
is like, I am absolutely convinced that this is a procedure that people love, and people have there's a huge amount of interest because people have that pain point. They're suffering right now with their vision. They just don't know what the solution is. So it does take more nurturing. There is not as much anywhere near as much knowledge about RLE or CLR as there is with LASIK. So that's where you gotta be way more intentional with how you move people down that journey. And again, that's where I think video content can come in and help utilize the surgeon, right? So you mentioned, that apprehension about talking price before they actually meet the surgeon. Well, what if they got to meet the surgeon by having all the video content sent to them
Mhm.
before they do a virtual consult? So then it's like you're answering every question that they may have, having video testimonials in there, all that stuff. That's the way to think about it. So then it's like, oh, I got to meet Dr. So and so. This procedure sounds like it really makes sense to me, as opposed to putting all the weight on your staff or your counselor to do that heavy lift. So
Yeah.
video content really helps to accelerate trust.
Okay, we better get cracking, get all these videos created.
Yeah.
Because, like, when I think about, like, a LASIK practice, so like, a practice like ours has been so focused on LASIK for so many years,
Yeah.
what are some of the things that have to change from a mindset, from a process standpoint in order to start focusing a little bit more on this ROE opportunity and demographic? So when you go into a practice, if you see like very heavy LASIK focused practices, what are some of the things that you say, that makes sense, but here are a few things that you might tweak?
Yeah. I mean, are you talking the operations? You talking on the marketing side or
Just
website? What are we
general,
talking?
everything is about our marketing, our internal systems, our
Yeah.
doctor mindset. Everything is very LASIK focused, and these are like the larger volume LASIK practices across the country who are
I,
suffering now because we're hurting. It's not as much.
you actually raised I think the first place to start is actually the mindset of the surgeon around the procedure, because no matter work that you do on the operational side or marketing, if the surgeon isn't really bought into it or isn't passionate about doing refractive lens exchange, then it really makes it difficult for the rest of the team to be able to do that. So I'd say number one is the surgeon bought in and realizing that they can be able to help that person to see clearly and whatnot from the benefits of the procedure. So that's number one, the surgeon.
Mm.
Number two, as I mentioned earlier, is you've got to take a look at your existing way of communication. A lot of practices have like their LASIK self test. Well, you need a vision self test that, depending upon the answer that a person gives, can funnel them down whether they're an ICL or a LASIK candidate or refractive lens exchange. And then the confirmation pages that you have from that self test need to speak about that specific procedure. I do not see many practices doing that. Same thing on the pricing side. So I analyze what the search terms are for refractive lens exchange and which ones are rising. So it's another thing you need to do is realize that people want to know what it costs. But what we did is we realized, well, you can, if you just give people, hey, RLE costs $15,000, they're going to get that sticker shock because you've not given them enough context. So what we do is we be able to say, hey, listen, in this video, you after the opt-in, you can be able to get all the answers to pricing and whatnot. But first, we want to let you know what RLE is, and can it treat astigmatism? Can you have it if you've had LASIK? Will you ever need a cataract, etc.? So that video content nurtures them, does the work of a virtual consult, and then we tell them the pricing at the end. So we're transparent, but that's kind of another framing, right? In addition to that, you need to look at what your lead response time is for new leads that are coming in.
Mhm.
These RLE leads need to be spoken to quickly. So if you aren't using a company like Boost or Optical, I'd recommend that you consider that. So that's the other one is your response time, and then nurturing, right? So how are you nurturing people in the practice? Many clinics that I talk to have really bad data. They just don't have the data to know what their lead response time is, their lead to consult conversion rate, their conversion rate from a in-office consult to surgery by rep. Like, so you kind of got to look at all that stuff. There's just a lot to look at. But to me, the opportunity is huge. But it requires a more proactive approach because with LASIK, the search volume is there. With RLE, you need to kind of push in and help to educate the market a little bit. And so we can talk a little bit later on like
Yeah.
social ads and radio and stuff because I think that's important too.
Quick break brought to you by Boost Patients. If you're listening to this podcast, you're probably a physician, a practice admin, or maybe someone on the marketing team, and you really have a singular goal. You want new patients, more consults, higher surgery volume. And oftentimes, when you want that, you think immediately about marketing, spending more on marketing, investing more in marketing. Maybe, but probably not. We've mystery shopped over 600 practices, and there's one commonality with all of them. They're not very effective and not very good at patient follow-up. So before you invest more money in marketing and more into that investment, you really need to understand how your practice is following up with new patients. So go to boostpatients.com, fill out the contact us form, and let me know that you want us to mystery shop your practice. We'll mystery shop it. We'll document how your practice follows up with your new patient lanes, and we'll share that information with you. Now back to the show.
Yeah, I want to get into that a little bit too when it
Yeah.
comes to the webinar. But before I
Yeah.
ask you that, I want to ask about the internal processes and maybe how much value do you put on internal education? Because if everyone they come in contact with throughout their journey in the
Yeah.
practice doesn't really know, you know, we've actually had somebody very sweetly ask what RLE is, like a staff member. And, I'm really glad that they asked that question, but I think we maybe underestimate how much education that we need to do internal, especially with more turnover these days and just general, or as you get a huge, your huge company that just is really hard to touch everyone. So maybe what do you think about internally having a small marketing slash education campaign to help everyone inside that touches these patients really understand what we're trying to guide them towards and so they can make them excited as well?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I actually just spoke to a practice yesterday about this, which was that same video content that I just referenced to you, which is like, here are the top questions about the procedure. You should have every one of your staff members to watch all that video content as well. So they're at least understanding when a surgeon is talking about, like, hey, will I ever need to have cataract surgery if I have RLE or CLR? How does a surgeon answer? I guarantee most people, most staff members have never sat in on a consultation, probably not watched an actual RLE procedure, maybe haven't talked to a patient afterwards and gotten video testimonials. So, utilizing that video content to help with the operational side of education is very important. And I think as a leader, also you want to be regularly meeting with your staff and finding out what are some of the questions that people are asking you that you're kind of getting stumped on or that you don't feel you're answering them the right way. And that's where I think the surgeon, especially in the early going, you want to be, everyone needs to be beating the same drum. The surgeon, the OD, as well as the patient counselors and reception and techs. Like if you don't have that cohesive communication,
Yeah,
it's really hard to scale because then people are saying different things. And that's where that anxiety about pricing comes in.
right.
So everybody needs to be on the same page with this.
You got to build a foundation before you can build a house, right?
100%. Yeah. And to use one of your, sort of like monikers, if you will, is what are those leakage points?
Mhm,
What are those different points in the patient journey where you're leaking opportunity? And I think if you have somebody on the operational side as your center director that's really good at looking at data,
mhm.
you start stacking those wins, right? And you start stacking improvement because you're probably not you might suck right off the bat if you start, trying to market RLE, but you'll get better as long as you're looking at the data.
Right. And the webinars has been something that has really interested us, especially as we started talking to you and
Yeah.
hearing some of the ways that you approach it. Can you just and I know that there's you help people do this, but just give me like the elevator pitch of okay, you got to think about making sure that you got this, you got to put it in these different places. So what's your elevator pitch for asking people to do these webinars?
Yeah, I think the short elevator pitch, and then I'll kind of get into some of the mechanics of it. Is this is a procedure that people really don't know a lot about, and what I think is what you're also going to find, as much as they don't know about it, They really are hungry for a solution. And a webinar is a fantastic way to be able to accelerate trust with the patient by answering some of the most common questions that people have in a relaxed, organic format with the surgeon. So that's sort of the elevator pitch,
Yeah.
will is this non-salesy, non-pitchy. It's purely organic, and the way that we do them. So, is it okay if I get into the
Oh,
mechanics?
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
great. So the way that you want to kind of think about doing a webinar, and we host them typically on a Wednesday or Thursday, 12 or 1 o'clock. And you've got a couple of, well, how do you get the people to come to the webinars? You've got a couple different ways to do that. Your existing list, right? So if you are doing marketing right now for RLE or CLR, well, obviously that would be one list to do. You also could send it to your alumni. Hey, if you know a friend or family member that's, you know, frustrated with their glasses, you could send them that link. You also could market utilizing social media. That's another way to do that.
Mhm.
I also recommend that you put a little banner very, very clearly on your site that resides there. I initially thought it should only be up there for 10 days to 14 days prior to the webinar, but
Mhm.
I actually saw a client do really well with it, having it up there 3 weeks before the webinar. So people can be able to just kind of like, yeah, I'd like to learn about this procedure, right?
Mhm.
So using that. In addition to that, we've also seen it really, really work well using radio. Radio is many people are like, well, does radio still work? It absolutely works for refractive lens
Mhm.
exchange. So that's another way we're driving people to come to the webinar. And then finally is your LASIK alumni. If you've been in a practice that's been around for 15, 20 years,
Mhm.
there's a lot of people I have seen on a webinar. Typically, it's roughly 30% of people that are on the webinar have already had LASIK, right? They've already had LASIK. They're already interested. They're like 55 and above, and they're frustrated. I've seen one practice have 75% of the people on a webinar have had LASIK. So that's the how you get the word out. Then it comes, we use Zoom, right? So when it comes to the actual day of the webinar, and you've done all your appropriate email reminders and text reminders, well, you want to be able to make sure you record the actual webinar. But the way that I do them is here's all the questions we're going to be asking, and I show everybody on the webinar, here's what we're going to be asking. But then I encourage people to be able to type in their questions, right? So I have a conversation much like you and I are having, and we don't have slides up. Why? Because I want to get the content, because a lot of those videos that you and I talked about earlier can come from a webinar, right? So the thing is that I know how to be able to ask a question to a surgeon because they're unconsciously competent. How can I get them to actually give an answer that really resonates and engages somebody? You do that by having a conversation like this.
Right.
So we don't use slides. And what I'm doing behind the scenes, and sometimes we have so many questions that I have to have one of our staff members actually, or from the
Help you
clinic
fill
actually
it.
answering the
Yeah.
question. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you'd have like over 100, right? And then when it comes to webinars done, then you need to have the post webinar follow up, making sure somebody from your team or from your call team is calling them and inviting them in for a consult, right? So, and
Mhm.
then you can utilize the content to send it out to people and create them into individual videos. So it's a whole
Yeah.
system around that, but
Yeah.
I'm absolutely convinced that if you want to do higher volume refractive lens exchange, you need to be doing webinars and also video content for sure.
So, two quick clarifying questions. So, you
Go ahead.
mentioned 12 or 1. You meant so middle of the day. That's been the best for you response time?
We've
Or
seen that. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
12 o'clock, typically on a Wednesday, Thursday. The reason why we choose that day is because it gives you time in the week of the webinar to promote it. And I failed to mention one component, which is you really want to have somebody from your team to be calling those people that register and welcoming them to, hey, we're excited for you to come to the webinar. Why? Because your no show or your attendance rates will go up, your no show rates will go down. So there's a lot of different things that we've realized that matter. So middle of the week, typically at lunchtime, if it's less than 100 people, I think you could probably do it in 30, 45 minutes max. If
mhm,
it's 100 to 200 people that are on the webinar, you're probably going to take 45 to an hour. But
yeah, yeah,
anybody that's listening that actually wants to watch a webinar and see how they're done, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to share a webinar so you can kind of watch how they go.
yeah. And I think the other one that's probably feels different than the norm is no slides, right? So,
Yeah.
no slides. So, it's just a conversation between you and a surgeon, and you're helping get out that content that people want to know, and questions, and you're phrasing questions in a way that you get your surgeon to answer that question
Yeah.
but it's just you having a conversation, and that's engaging, and people are going to watch. And you've had good response there, huh?
Yeah, same like that you do on your podcast, right?
Yeah,
Like, how would this be if you and I were talking through a bunch of slides and there's
yeah,
a disconnect that happens, right? So
right.
what I'm doing on the webinar, and I'm not the star of the show, the surgeon's the star of the show, the patient's the star, right? So what I'm doing is I'm asking question in such a way and I'm pacing them with the energy, right? So I'm intentional with my energy on that webinar. I want them to kind of give that answer that's and want the feeling to be
Mhm.
organic, right? As opposed to a sales pitch.
Sure.
So we do a few slides at the front end, like the opening slide and then the surgeon bio side for credentialing.
Mhm.
And we do a little bit of stuff. We could utilize Rendia at times for sure, a little bit of modeling, because I think that's important when you're talking about, the lens and the cornea and all that different stuff. So I use Rendia is probably one thing that I do kind of bounce in and out if it
Mhm.
serves the purpose. But I'd say 65 to 70% of the webinar, if not more, is all no slides.
Organic. Yeah.
Organic,
And
totally.
so, and you're taking a lot of those questions that the people are asking during it, and you're saying, "Hey, doctor, somebody again, I see a lot of questions about does it last? What can you say about does this procedure last, and what can they expect?" And so you'll
Yeah.
say stuff like that, and you get questions from the audience, and then you get him to engage or her.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that because I already have, like, the template of the top 15 questions that people ask, like, I analyzed, hundreds and hundreds of questions, and we found these are the top 15 questions that people ask. And so what we do is we have those as sort of like the foundation of the questions that we're gonna ask on the webinar. And then what I find is that as there's a question that comes in that's a little bit different, that I think is useful, then I'll ask the surgeon that. But I try not to jump around too much with questions that we're getting from the crowd because I want to have a bit of a cadence or a flow, which is typically like identifying the problem that they have with their vision, talk about what the procedure is, and then kind of going through the patient journey. Like, what is the experience like when they have the procedure done and recovery time? And we kind of go through it that way. And we certainly spend a good amount of time talking about lens options, LAL, all that stuff. So
Yeah.
I think it's what I also do when it comes to answering questions, I make sure I mention the person's name. Hey, Jane has a question, because then it feels to the crowd, oh, I want to ask a question because subconsciously maybe I want to hear my name called out by the surgeon, right? So that stuff does matter, right? Like I think that as somebody asks a question, it starts to get a bit of a snowball effect, and you start realizing, like, typically at around the 2/3 mark, we just get
Mhm.
pummeled with questions, which is great.
Yeah. Yeah. And it feels more like a conversation instead of a sales pitch, right? You're just asking questions,
Yeah.
and right, and it has a more organic feel, which I bet has more of an impact on people, and hopefully gets more
Yeah.
people to engage.
And there's something that I mentioned at the front end of the webinar is I say your job or your goal here, or inspiration for you, is not to decide whether or not you want to have RLE or CLR done. Our inspiration to you is, would you like to find out if you're a candidate? And at the end of our time together here on this webinar, we're going to express to you an opportunity to do that. It's a free consultation here at our practice, but that'll be the end of the webinar. We're going to give you that opportunity, right? If you wanted to offer a modest incentive for people to do that, have at it, absolutely. We have found, typically speaking, we don't have any advertisements for people for refractive lens exchange on to attend a webinar. We've tried to maintain that price integrity. I know in LASIK, you know, it's you see how often it's price reduction, price reduction. You don't need to do that for an hourly webinar. Purely the fact of giving them an opportunity to learn about this procedure is enough. You don't need to give a discount for attending the webinar.
And then you got to make sure you nurture your registrant list, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So people that register, you get so what we typically
Before and
find is,
after. Can you talk
yeah,
a
yeah,
little? Sorry, can you just a little more detail on before and after?
yeah. So if you're doing a webinar, let's say we're doing one on Thursday, the first time, and you've already got that little banner that's up on your site. So as far as like the reaching out to your existing list, we would send it on the Friday before the webinar, and then the Monday or Tuesday, and then one the day of. We do it via text and via email to get people to register. For those people that register, well, then we have a custom confirmation page. That's a key thing. Is once somebody registers, they'll also see a video of me or the surgeon. Hey, thank you so much for registering, blah, 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 blah. Here's what's going to happen on the webinar. And by the way, if you'd like to and get a kind of cheat the line, you can schedule a consultation right now. You can actually get people scheduling consults that register for the webinar, and many of them can maybe not even attend, right? So,
Mhm.
so a custom registration page, custom confirmation page for those people. As far as after the actual webinar, you want to thank them again for attending the webinar, and then you want to. Sometimes you need to do a little bit of a minor edit to the video. I've had it. I've actually had it where a surgeon, they would get caught up in the procedure of whatever they're doing, and I have to lead the webinar for 10 minutes. I've actually had to do an entire hourly webinar on my own because the surgeon had to deal with a challenging case. But
Mhm.
my point is that there's any minor edits to that webinar video, do that before you send it out, right? And then you want to nurture them, right? So you can send it to them a few emails after the fact, but just a phone call makes a difference. Just a welcoming, engaging call from your team, typically the day after, and give people that opportunity to kind of watch the content again.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you got to make sure that you can do that effectively and persistently enough, or like you said earlier, get somebody to help you do that if you can't. That could be another place where you somebody falls, right? If they're not prepared to do that.
That's another leakage point for sure. It's just expecting, many people expect marketing automation and AI to do all the work for you. Nothing beats a human to human interaction. And I think
Yeah.
that, like, if you want your team oozing confidence and empathy, right? And transparency, right? Like, that's the mindset you want to have around refractive lens exchange. Is not like, hey, we're looking to sell you, come on in kind of thing. Like, and really what you want is them to come on in and have a conversation with your staff and your medical team and doctors so they can see if it's right for them. That's the way we frame it. Is you want to find out if RLE or CLR is right for you.
That's awesome, man. I appreciate the explanation. I think,
Yeah.
you
Well,
know,
I think many people are sleeping on it though. I think that
yeah,
I really think if you are committed to growing your refractive lens exchange volume, there's a lot of actions that you need to be taking to be able to show that that's true. And the question I would say is, look back on the last week, last month of how you are running your practice. Does it show that you're actually taking those right actions? For many cases, it's not, right? And I think it comes down to not only their website, not only their internal communication, but how they're communicating to patients. It's just, it requires a different mindset, right?
right.
And we've also seen, like, like the huge amount of interest that people have on social advertising, right? That's another part to this. Is like, there is a like I cannot believe how easy it is to get a lead on social media for refractive lens exchange, and even get a lead, but not even have to mention the procedure. You
Right.
know, we actually use one of the fears that I think practices have is, well, my surgeon sucks on video and I don't really want to have them to be in the ad, or they don't want to do it, or it's so much pain to do that.
Mhm.
We were actually able to utilize female UGC creators for RLE. And the range of costs that I'm getting for an RLE lead right now is anywhere between five to, I'd say on the high side, $12 a lead. Right? So you think
Yeah.
about that. Like,
Yeah.
that is somebody that's expressing interest. You've talked to them about the problem, that there is a solution that they can do. But the reality is, those people just don't have the proper systems and operations set up to turn that low cost lead into an actual procedure. And that's where that video content comes in. That's where your staff, potentially doing virtual consults, can come in. That's where they got to pre-educate the patient, right? So I think it's a huge opportunity. The difference, so Guido, I think with RLE comparative to LASIK, is LASIK, we had all the manufacturers that are willing to spend money. You had the large LASIK Plus, TLC, LVIs, advertising. Nobody's really driving RLE or CLR nationwide awareness. That's where you as a practice need to take that proactive approach, and social media, webinars, a little bit of Google, and I think that radio advertising. That's one thing I'll mention real quick is, we have seen, if you want to go from, say, 50 eyes a month to 100 eyes a month, that's where you need to deploy some more traditional media. And you know we've used radio to very, very good success, in the sense of having a endorser, or having a announcer. It's like the LASIK model, where you have somebody who's the announcer do the procedure. But I have a client that actually has Mark Schlereth, who's the Fox NFL announcer.
Mhm.
who's had the procedure done, who's the endorser for their practice, right? Like just that
Yeah, yeah,
mindset of like, oh, really, you can do that. So if you're looking to kind of take it up and like double your volume, if you're doing 50 eyes a month and you want to do more, radio really, really works, I think, for this procedure because that's where the
that's where
55
that
and older.
demographic is, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Maybe, sports radio,
TV too. Yeah,
talk radio,
conservative talk. Yeah.
that kind of stuff. Yeah,
Yeah, where they have an active listener, a very dedicated listener, right? So,
right.
like I said, conservative talks work well, sports radio,
Mhm.
but the team that I have all of my higher volume RLE and CLR clients using is the same radio team that we worked with for close to 20 years. So, if you're somebody and you're hearing this and like, oh, really? I'd like to kind of
Mhm.
find out how that works. I'd be happy to kind of put
Yeah,
you in touch with them. But
yeah.
they're outstanding. Like we've kind of figured out how to message this procedure on radio, and it works very, very well.
So, there's obviously opportunity here, right? I mean,
Yeah.
but how would you how would you answer the person that says, "Well, LASIK is really suffered the last few years, but as soon as the LASIK market rebounds, this is gonna kinda fall by the wayside." What would your answer to that be?
I mean, I would respectfully disagree. I think that we've all been sitting here the last few years, and last year was just one of the most challenging years for laser eye surgery, and that I can remember. And I've been, at this game for over 20 years, and kind of seen all the different, drops in, the COVID, the 2008 drop, and just after '05, like there's all these different points of it. I'm not focusing on when and if LASIK comes back. What I can tell you is that I have seen and experienced the amount of interest on this procedure, or rather, the amount of interest that there are in people that have the problem right now of degrading vision. Right, so it's that spot between 50 and 55 to 65. You know, the pre cataract range. There are people that are suffering and really want to have. They don't know where to turn, and so I think that if you want to wait for LASIK, that's fine. That's your choice. But I have seen practices do an astounding amount of volume on revenue wise on RLE that dwarfs now like almost double what they're doing in LASIK volume. So I mean, I can tell you, it's not just theory. It's like I
Yeah,
literally am seeing it in front of us, right?
yeah,
But it's just the question is whether or not you want to and that you're committed to doing it.
right.
And you don't need to, the answer isn't, hey, let's go spend a whole bunch of money on RLE marketing. It's let's get our operations right. Let's get our website right. Let's get our phone team right. Let's get the infrastructure set up properly. Let's get our data right.
Mhm.
Once you do that, that's why I'm so passionate about the video content. Like every single person should be educated about this procedure, utilizing video content from your doctor.
Yeah,
That's what's going to accelerate trust and improve those conversion rates to consult and to surgery. So there's a little bit of like behind the scenes infrastructure you can do right now. And even if it's that you want to get 5 more eyes a month or 10 more eyes a month, it's all right there with you. And the other thing I'll say, Guido, is you also have an opportunity, especially if you're a higher volume cataract practice. This is a procedure that you're already doing.
right.
You're just kind of backing it out a little bit for someone who's 10 years younger than that. And you already have the existing referral relationships, for example, with the ODs out in the community. So could you help the ODs to educate their patients about refractive lens exchange or CLR by giving them an opportunity for their patients to kind of, hey, over at Man Eye, they've got these amazing videos on this procedure. I know, John, you've been expressing how frustrated you are with your glasses. You're 58 years old. RLE may be something for you to consider. But before you schedule a consult, why don't you take out your phone, scan it right here, and you can
Yeah,
watch these videos over the next week and then decide if you want to come in, right? So that's
mhm,
kind of my mindset as well, is how do we empower on the co-management side, because they have access to the patients that you want. And that's something I'm absolutely certain of that most, you know, centers are not doing, which is proactively helping the referring ODs to know more about this procedure. That's another missed opportunity.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, I love it, man. Create trust, educate, and continue to increase that value. And a lot of what you said, everything you said makes sense. I think some people listening might be like, "Man, how do I even get started?" So if people want to find you, and how do they find you if they want some help getting this off
Yeah,
the
I mean, I think that I'm pretty easy to find. I would say you can be able to just reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Yep.
I think that's it's probably the easiest place to kind of find me. Just I'm a very friendly Canadian, so love to have an opportunity to connect. Um, and I've been in this space for 20 years, so I've kind of seen all the different cycles of what's gone on. I believe that this right now we're at the start of a. It's not going to be as rapid of a rise, I think, as LASIK was in the early 2000s. It's going to be a slower, steady, like hockey stick, if you will. But I think that if practices are proactive and educating, and you know, I think you need to look at what's going on internally and are you set up properly to do this? And another one of our mutual friends, Sharif Madavi, has got a great program for how to be able to set up, how to wow people with your patient experience. This is a procedure you need to wow people for, right? And I think you need to treat them a little bit differently because they expect really good quality vision. So I think that there's a lot of things that people can do, but it all really starts with the conversation. And so, I can be able to help a practice whether they're doing nothing and you want to launch an RLE program, or whether they're doing a sufficient amount and you want to double what they're doing. I'd say the first step is let's chat and kind of figure out where you're at and see how we could optimize what you're currently doing,
Mhm.
and then to be able to scale from there.
Love it, man. Appreciate you joining the show. A lot of great stuff,
Yeah.
and it was really good to connect. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm honored to be here on the first season, or the third
Or-
season, the first
Yeah,
episode. So
yeah,
thank you so much for having me, and looking forward to continue to chat.
absolutely. Also, want to thank the listeners for joining us today. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe and share us with your friends on social media. And another shout out to Boost Patients for helping produce a podcast. Boost helps ophthalmology practices get more new patients without spending a dime on marketing. You can learn more about them at their website at boostpatients.com. Ophthalmology gurus, hope you have a great week, and see you soon.